The first time I saw Vincent Russo, he was bleeding out in a Brooklyn back alley, his Armani suit torn, his breath ragged, and his eyes burning with a fire that could have set the city ablaze. I should have walked away. God knows I'd seen enough trouble in my 25 years to know better, but something about him, something raw and desperate, pinned me to the spot. By the time I dragged him to safety, my hands were stained with his blood, and my life was no longer my own. My name's Eli Carter, and I grew up in the kind of neighborhood where dreams go to die. Red Hook, Brooklyn, wasn't exactly a fairy tale. Cracked sidewalks, flickering streetlights, and the constant hum of danger in the air. I'd clawed my way out of foster homes and dead-end jobs, surviving on grit and a knack for staying invisible. But invisibility doesn't pay the bills. So when a shady contact offered me a gig as a personal escort for a high roller, I didn't ask too many questions. I needed the cash, and I figured I could handle whatever came my way. I didn't know then that escort meant bodyguard, driver, confidant, and eventually something far more dangerous. Vincent Russo wasn't just any high roller. He was the head of the Russo crime family, a man whose name made hardened criminals flinch. At 38, he was a legend in New York's underworld, a kingpin who ruled with an iron fist and a smile that could charm the devil himself. But that night in the alley, he wasn't a kingpin. He was a man, vulnerable and human, clutching a bullet wound and whispering, "Don't let me die here." I didn't. I patched him up, got him to a safe house. And somehow, that one act of reckless compassion became my ticket into his world. The job was simple. At least on paper, stay by Vincent's side. Keep him alive. And don't ask questions. I was good at it. I'd learned how to read a room, spot a threat, and throw a punch before I was 10. Growing up gay in a neighborhood that saw difference as weakness had taught me to be fast, sharp, and fearless. Vincent noticed. He didn't just want a bodyguard. He wanted someone he could trust. And for reasons I couldn't fathom, he chose me. Within weeks, I was more than his shadow. I was his right hand, the one he called when the world closed in. Vincent's world was a labyrinth of danger and decadence. His penthouse in Manhattan glittered with crystal chandeliers and floor-to-ceiling windows. But it was a cage as much as a castle. Rivals circled like vultures rival families. Crooked cops, even his own lieutenants, always looking for a crack in his armor. I saw the toll it took on him. The way his jaw tightened when he thought no one was watching. The way he'd pour a third whiskey at 2 a.m. and stare out at the city like it was a battlefield. But I also saw the man beneath the myth, the way he'd laugh, sharp and sudden, at some dry joke I'd make. The way his hand would linger on my shoulder just a second too long. It was that lingering touch that first sparked something dangerous between us. I wasn't naive. I knew what desire looked like, even if I'd spent years burying my own. Growing up, I'd learned to hide who I was, to keep my head down and my heart locked away. Love was a luxury I couldn't afford, not when survival demanded every ounce of me. But Vincent was a force of nature, a storm I couldn't outrun. His eyes, dark and piercing, seemed to see through every wall I'd built. And the more time we spent together, the harder it was to ignore the heat that crackled in the air between us. One night, after a deal went south and we barely escaped a hail of bullets in Hell's Kitchen, we ended up in a dive bar. Just the two of us. The adrenaline was still pumping. My knuckles bruised from a fight, his tie loosened and his hair a mess. He looked at me over his glass of bourbon, his voice low and rough. "Eli," he said, "you're the only one I trust in this godforsaken world." I laughed it off, but my heart was pounding. I didn't know then that those words would change everything. The first time he kissed me, it wasn't planned. It was late. The city quiet outside his penthouse. And we were arguing about what? I can't even remember. Something about me being reckless, about him taking too many risks. His voice was sharp, his eyes blazing. And then he was there. Too close. His hands gripping my jacket. Before I could think, his lips were on mine. Fierce and desperate. Like he was drowning and I was air. I kissed him back. Hard. Pouring every unspoken feeling into that moment. When we pulled apart. Panting. He looked at me like I was his salvation and his ruin. That kiss was the beginning. But it was also a warning. Vincent's world didn't allow for weakness. And love, I was learning, was the most dangerous weakness of all. His enemies were closing in. And I was starting to see cracks in his empire. His second in command, Marco, a wiry man with a snake's smile, watched us too closely. His loyalty questionable. The DiNapoli family, a rival outfit, was making bold moves. And whispers of a traitor in Vincent's ranks were growing louder. I knew I was in too deep. But walking away wasn't an option, not when Vincent looked at me like I was the only thing keeping him human. Every night, I'd lie awake in the guest room of his penthouse, listening to the city's pulse and wondering how long we could keep this up. I was his protector, his confidant, his secret, but I was also a liability. A gay man in his world was a target, and a gay man in love with the boss was a death sentence. Yet, every time I thought about leaving, Vincent would find me, his voice soft, his touch softer, and he'd say, "Stay? Eli, I need you." And God help me, I did. By the time I realized how much danger we were in, it was too late. The DiNapolis had a plan. Marco was playing both sides, and Vincent's empire was teetering on the edge. I'd sworn to protect him, but protecting Vincent Russo meant protecting his heart and mind. And that was a battle I wasn't sure I could win. The days after that first kiss were a blur of stolen moments and mounting dread. Vincent and I were playing a dangerous game, one where every touch, every glance, could be our undoing. His penthouse, once a fortress, now felt like a stage where we performed for an audience of shadows as men. His enemies, and the ever-watchful Marco, whose smirk grew sharper with every passing day. I tried to focus on the job. Keep Vincent alive. Watch his back. Stay sharp. But it was hard when his presence was everywhere, his cologne lingering in the car, his low chuckle echoing in my head, his hand brushing mine when he passed me a coffee. We'd sit in his office late at night, going over security plans or intel on the DiNapolis. And I'd catch him staring, his eyes heavy with something unspoken. "Eli," he'd say, his voice rough with exhaustion. "You're the only thing that makes sense in this mess." I'd nod, my throat tight, and change the subject. But inside, I was unraveling. Vincent was a man of contradictions. He could order a hit with the same calm he used to order dinner. But when we were alone, he was different, vulnerable, almost fragile. One night, after a tense meeting with his lieutenants, he pulled me into his study and shut the door. "I'm tired, Eli," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Tired of the lies, the blood, the games." He stepped closer, his fingers tracing the scar on my cheek, a relic from a foster home fight I'd never talk about. "You make me want to be better." I didn't know what to say, so I just held him, my arms tight around his trembling frame. In that moment, he wasn't the Mafia boss. He was just Vincent, and I was just Eli, and the world outside didn't exist. But the world outside was closing in. The DiNapolis were getting bolder, hitting Vincent's operations with surgical precision. A warehouse in Queens was torched. A shipment vanished. One of Vincent's trusted drivers turned up dead in the Hudson. I doubled security, triple-checked every route. But the leaks kept coming. Marco was always there, offering smooth assurances and quick fixes. But I didn't trust him. His eyes lingered on Vincent too long, not with loyalty, but with calculation. I started digging. Quietly. Using old contacts from my Red Hook days. What I found made my blood run cold. Marco was feeding intel to the DiNapolis, biding his time to make a move. I didn't tell Vincent right away. He was under enough pressure, and I wasn't sure he'd believe me. Marco had been with him for years, longer than I had. But the evidence was piling up: texts, bank transfers, a burner phone I found in Marco's car. I confronted him one night in the garage, away from Vincent's eyes. "You're a dead man if he finds out," I hissed, my fist clenched. Marco just laughed, his voice dripping with venom. "You think you're special, Carter. You're just his pet. When he's done with you, you'll be nothing." I wanted to break his jaw, but I held back. I needed proof, not a fight. The tension was eating me alive. Vincent sensed it, too. He started pulling away, not because he wanted to, but because he was scared, not for himself, but for me. "You don't belong in this world, Eli," he said one night, his voice raw. We were in his car, parked on a quiet street in Harlem, rain drumming on the roof. "You're too good for it." I wanted to scream that I wasn't good, that I was just as broken as he was. But instead, I kissed him, hard and desperate, like I could prove my place by his side with my lips alone. He kissed me back, but there was a sadness in it, a goodbye he didn't say out loud. The breaking point came during a meeting at a waterfront warehouse. Vincent was negotiating a truce with a smaller crew, a desperate move to stabilize his crumbling empire. I was by his side, scanning the room, when I saw Marco slip out. My gut screamed trouble. I followed him, keeping low, and caught him on a call, his voice low and urgent. "Tonight," he said, "the DiNapolis will hit him at the pier." My heart stopped. I slipped back inside, grabbed Vincent, and whispered the truth in his ear. His face didn't change, but his hand gripped mine under the table, hard enough to bruise. We got out. Barely. The DiNapolis hit the warehouse minutes after we left, guns blazing. Vincent's men scattered, and we ended up in a safe house in the Bronx. Just the two of us. He was shaking, not from fear, but from rage. "Marco," he spat, pacing the room. "After everything. That bastard." I didn't say anything. I just stood there, watching the man I loved wrestle with betrayal. When he finally stopped, he looked at me, his eyes raw. "You saved me again, Eli. You always do." I wanted to tell him I'd do it forever, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I pulled him close, and we stood there, holding each other as the world burned outside. The safe house was a temporary reprieve, a crumbling apartment with peeling wallpaper and a single flickering bulb. Vincent sat on the edge of a sagging couch, his head in his hands, while I checked the windows for the 10th time. Outside, the Bronx was alive with sirens and shadows, a reminder that nowhere was truly safe. I'd saved Vincent from Marco's betrayal, but the DiNapolis were still out there, and Marco was still breathing. That thought alone kept me wired, my nerves frayed to the breaking point. Vincent was different after the warehouse. Quieter. Haunted. He'd always carried the weight of his world, but now it was crushing him. I caught him staring at me sometimes, his eyes full of something I couldn't name: guilt, maybe, or fear. "You should go, Eli," he said one night, his voice barely audible over the hum of the city. "This life, it'll destroy you." I shook my head, my jaw tight. "I'm not leaving you, Vincent. Not now. Not ever." He didn't argue, but the way he looked away told me he didn't believe he was worth saving. I couldn't let him spiral. I started planning, using every trick I'd learned in my years on the streets. I reached out to old contacts, people who owed me favors from my Red Hook days: hackers, informants, even a crooked cop who'd looked the other way when I was a kid. I needed to take down Marco, and cripple the DiNapolis before they could strike again. It was a long shot, but I had no choice. Vincent was my reason to keep going. The only thing that made the chaos of my life make sense. The plan came together slowly. My contacts confirmed Marco was holed up in a safe house of his own, plotting with the DiNapolis to take Vincent's place. I gathered evidence recordings, documents, anything that could turn Vincent's remaining loyal men against Marco. But the deeper I dug, the more I realized how far the betrayal went. Marco wasn't just a traitor. He was a puppet master, manipulating Vincent's lieutenants, sowing distrust. Half the family was ready to jump ship, and Vincent didn't even know it. I told him everything one night, laying out the evidence on the safe house's rickety table. He listened, his face unreadable, but his hands were shaking. When I finished, he stood, walked to the window, and stared out at the city. I built this empire with my own hands, he said, his voice low and bitter. And now it's eating me alive. I stepped behind him, resting my hands on his shoulders. Then let it go. Vincent, I whispered. We'll find another way. He turned, his eyes searching mine, and for a moment, I thought he might kiss me. Instead, he pulled me into a hug, his breath warm against my neck. You're my way, Eli, he murmured. You always have been. That moment gave me the strength to push forward. I set a trap for Marco, leaking false intel about Vincent's location to draw him out. The plan was risky, use myself as bait to lure Marco and the DiNapolis into a trap where Vincent's loyal men could take them down. Vincent hated it. You're not risking your life for me, he growled, his voice sharp with fear. But I didn't back down. I'm doing this because I love you, I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. His eyes widened, and for a second, the world stopped. Then he kissed me, slow and deep, like he was memorizing me. I love you too, he whispered against my lips. Don't make me lose you. The night of the trap was chaos. We staged it in an abandoned factory in Long Island City, the kind of place where screams didn't carry. I stood in the open, heart pounding, while Vincent and his men waited in the shadows. Marco showed up, smug and armed, with a DiNapoli enforcer at his side. You're predictable, Carter, he sneered, raising his gun. I didn't flinch. And you're a dead man, I shot back. Before he could pull the trigger, Vincent's men moved in, a storm of gunfire and chaos. I dove for cover, my pulse racing. And when the dust settled, Marco was down, blood pooling around him. The DiNapoli enforcer was gone. But we'd won for now. Vincent found me in the aftermath, his face pale but his eyes fierce. He grabbed me, checking for wounds, his hands frantic. You're okay, he kept saying, like a prayer. I nodded, gripping his hand. We're okay. But we both knew it wasn't over. The DiNapolis would regroup, and Vincent's empire was still crumbling. But in that moment, with his arms around me, I felt like we could face anything. The factory fight bought us time, but it didn't fix the cracks in Vincent's world or in us. We went back to the safe house, battered but alive. And for a few days, it was just us. No empire, no enemies, just stolen moments where we could pretend we were normal. We'd lie in bed, his head on my chest, talking about things we'd never dared before, dreams of a life far from New York. Maybe a cabin in the mountains where no one could find us. But those dreams felt like sand slipping through our fingers. The DiNapolis were still out there, and Vincent's men were fracturing. Loyalty bought with fear now fading fast. I knew Vincent was planning something big. He'd get that look, eyes distant, jaw set like he was carrying a weight I couldn't touch. One night, he sat me down, his hands clasped tight around mine. I'm going to end this, Eli, he said, his voice steady but heavy. one way or another. I didn't like the sound of it, but I knew better than to argue. Vincent Russo didn't survive this long by backing down. His plan was reckless, a face-to-face with Lorenzo Di Napoli, the head of the rival family. Vincent wanted to negotiate a truce, to carve up territory and stop the bloodshed. I hated it. Lorenzo was a snake, and I didn't trust him to play fair. But Vincent was done running. "I'm tired of fighting. Eli," he said, "I want a life with you." Those words hit me like a punch. I'd spent so long protecting him. I hadn't let myself hope for a future. Now, it was all I could see. The meeting was set for a neutral spot, a deserted pier in Staten Island at dawn. I insisted on going, my gun heavy at my hip, my eyes scanning every shadow. Vincent's remaining loyal men flanked us, but I didn't trust them either. Too many had turned, and the air was thick with tension. Lorenzo arrived with his own crew, his smile cold and calculated. "Vincent," he said, his voice smooth as silk, "you look tired." Vincent didn't flinch. "Let's end this." "Lorenzo, no more blood." The negotiation was a tightrope. Lorenzo wanted half of Vincent's territory. Vincent offered a quarter. They went back and forth, voices calm but edged with steel. I stood behind Vincent, my heart pounding, watching Lorenzo's men for any sudden moves. Then I saw a glint of metal in the hands of one of Lorenzo's enforcers. "Vincent!" I shouted, shoving him down as the shot rang out. Chaos erupted. Bullets flew. Men screamed. And I dragged Vincent behind a crate, firing back. My shoulder burned a graze. Nothing serious, but Vincent's face was white with panic. "Eli." "No," he gasped, grabbing my arm. "Not you." We fought our way out, Vincent's men holding the line while I got him to the car. Blood was everywhere, mine. His. Theirs. We sped away, my hands shaking on the wheel. Vincent cursing beside me. "You could have died," he kept saying, his voice breaking. I didn't answer. I just drove, my mind racing. The truce was dead, and so was any hope of peace. Back at the safe house, Vincent broke. He sank to the floor, his head in his hands. And for the first time, I saw him cry. "I can't do this anymore," he whispered. "I can't lose you." I knelt beside him, pulling him close. "You won't," I said, my voice fierce. "We're getting out. Together." He looked at me, his eyes raw with hope and fear. "You mean it?" I nodded. "I love you, Vincent. That's enough." We made a plan not for power, but for freedom. Vincent had money stashed, enough to disappear. My contacts got us new identities, a car, a way out. The night we left New York, the city was quiet, the skyline glowing like a promise we couldn't keep. We drove west. No destination, just the open road and each other. Vincent reached for my hand, his fingers threading through mine. "You're my salvation, Eli," he said, his voice soft but sure. I smiled, my heart full despite the uncertainty. "And you're mine." Months later, we were in a small town in Colorado, living in a cabin surrounded by pines. Vincent wasn't a kingpin anymore. He was just a man, learning to live without shadows. I wasn't his escort, I was his partner, his equal. The world we'd left behind still haunted us in nightmares. But every morning, we woke up to each other. And that was enough. Love, I'd learned, wasn't a weakness. It was the only thing worth fighting for.